Good morning, everyone. John471 here to discuss the futures markets. It is Thursday, May 15th, 2025. Allow me to read our disclaimer. Derivatives trading is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Let's begin today, as we always do, with our news. Fairly busy today, starting off at 8:30 Eastern. We have PPI, retail sales, Philly Fed, and Empire State all at 8:30 Eastern. 8:40, we have Powell giving opening remarks at some conference. I don't know if there will be a Q&A. This may not, if there's not a Q&A, it may not be a big deal, but we definitely want to be aware of when he's speaking. 9:15 industrial production, and then at 10 a.m. we have biz inventories and the housing market index. And that rounds us off. We do have Barr speaking at 2:05. So a little bit fairly busy day. A few things coming out. The 8:30 data will be the most important. 10 o'clock data also will be to be aware of. Let's move on to our charts. Okay, here we are with the S&P 500 daily bars, full session, and just reminding us of our narrative on this chart. The key thing that we've done is we've come back and reclaimed the range of March. We broke the prior month's range and have been able to continue to push higher. And we got to the 5821s, which was a really big benchmark, kind of big composite VPOC, push through it and are holding it. So now what we're attentive to is this range that we're trying to reclaim. And the 6,000 figure, the value low, HVN, that's the next key target up for me on this time frame. What are the important areas here? Just looking at the daily chart. Well, like I said, we've pushed above that CVPOC area, which is the 5821s. So right in this area, we pushed through it, pulled back essentially to it, and now we've kind of just held. So looking at this area now, we're starting to shift into balance. Yesterday we were unable to take the prior day's high. Yesterday was an inside day, and now today, as we can see, we have broken the prior day's low pre-market. So we have pre-market broken the one time framing. And so our biggest question here are we going to get bought up back into the prior day's range and continue higher? Or are there sellers firming up in yesterday's range, in which case we'll explore prices lower? Let's go to a smaller time frame chart and discuss that specifically. Okay, so here we see the S&P 500. This is a P&F chart. And we see these lavender areas, which are the overnight trade. So we can see, what else we can see is right here, this purple area is the 5821 MCVPOC region, or CVPOC region that I talked about. And you can see how we kind of, when we traded here, we essentially just kind of pushed above it and we've sort of held above it. We seem to have found our sellers, at least initially, right here, as we've pushed this high just ahead of the single prints. And then yesterday we were unable to retest that high and have began to explore prices lower. So for me, what this, like I said, this looks to be finding buyers. So as long as we're staying below this century zone and we're not making new highs, new rotational highs in this overnight range, I would be open to continued exploration of prices lower to find buyers, with key targets being the CPI SOC and really this area here around the mid-century. This is like the key area for these two zones, 40 to 50. This is the key area that I would expect support to begin to firm up. So what could that look like if that actually happens? We're potentially opening in a gap here, kind of pushing at it. So as long as yesterday's range remains resistance, maybe an attempt pre-market, fall back out, we continue taking the overnight low. I would be open for continuation to take this CPI SOC, as I noted, and the mid-century figure right here. So hitting there, this would be the first like key area for me, and really an area I'd expect I'd be open to some support where we might see some reversion higher. But if we do not, I would be open to continuation lower. The key target, the absolute like key target for me today would be this CVPOC area. I would expect support on the initial test. So if we're unable to get back above on any pullbacks once we get this 54 zone, if we can't get back above, get back into range, and we stay in this 82 zone holds us down, I'd be up for continuation lower to test this 40 zone and then potentially this magnet zone. If we do get this test, if we go as far down as the magnet zone, I'm definitely expecting support on the initial test. I don't know if that support would be a full reversal, but I would expect support in this area around here. That is to say, if we defeat this LVN of this day, which is significant, it held on the first test, defeating it, I would expect it to be at least initial support waiting there. That's if we continue lower and stay out of range. At any point, though, however, if we're able to get back above the century area, get back into yesterday was a very balanced profile. If we're able to get back into yesterday's value area, however that happens, whatever push we get or don't get ahead of it, if we're able to get back into the century area today and hold, I would be open to excursion higher. I would just target yesterday's auction levels. We have yesterday's VPOC here. Value high is the zone. If we get value high and we're able to continue to hold yesterday's range, then I would definitely be up for excursion higher. Why is that? Because anybody who was short in this, is really, really, really hoping this continues. And if this doesn't continue and they don't get to cover at the prices they want to, and we get back into yesterday's range and people start buying things, we could see stops go off if we get above yesterday's value high, the 59.17 zone. It's a possibility. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it's possible. But that would basically be what would set off the long for me. If we get back into range, we get back into yesterday's value, this area here, maybe it chops around a bit, but if we're able to push value high, then I would be open to continuation. The target for me would be these single prints. And through this, because everybody's long, I would just be going zone to zone because, I mean, it would be great to see us take out yesterday's value high and just give a nice give a nice impulse, and it would be easy to trade. But I feel like even if we get there, it'll be kind of grindy just because what's happening in the S&Ps feels it's pretty orderly, seems to be pretty obvious, so the trades aren't super easy. We're not getting the rotations we were just last week. So for that reason, I'm going to wrap up the S&Ps right here. Well, I'll give you the nothing zone. The nothing zone would essentially be anything, in my opinion, that kind of gets back into yesterday's range and looks like maybe we're going to revert, but actually doesn't revert and just falls lower, and we get kind of a choppy, this would be a yesterday's range offered trade where we make an attempt to push, we fall out, and then yesterday's range kind of stays offered but doesn't really do anything good. That would be the nothing day for me. Nothing day also could be if we push down and get the mid-century area target and just hold this area bid. Basically what I'm saying is just spending a lot of time between century and mid-century today, that could be an outside in trade. But anyway, that's what I got for the S&Ps. Any questions, ask me in the chat room. I hope that is complete. And now we're going to end it. No, we're actually going to move on to crude oil today. We're going to talk a little bit about crude oil just for fun. Actually, not just for fun, but also because if the S&Ps just go into a relentless slog higher, they're going to be a less interesting trade, and crude might be a more interesting trade. So we'll start with crude on the higher time frame. We won't go too into it today, but I'm just going to kind of introduce some auction dynamics that are playing out that I think are really interesting. This is crude oil, WTI crude, daily bars, full session. The profiles are yearly. So what I want us to be aware of first is this is a 2024 profile. We opened 2025 in last year's value. We pushed up out of last year's value, fell back. We were unable to get the high, no high, and then we fell back into value, couldn't get back out, and we've continued lower, taking out last year's value low and continuing to take last year's low. So we made a lower low on the year in crude oil. We have this area, which looks to be a pretty decisive break in crude oil. It corresponds with last year's value low. In this year's profile, what we see is just really choppy, toothy, and a noticeable LVN right here around the value low. And then this sort of toothier area right here where we sort of just like wafted around the prior year's low trying to make a decision. And that's where we kind of end up here, where we've pushed to this area and we're starting to fall out. This 60-41s are a very important area because they are the prior year's low, and that is a higher time frame area. So the big key for me on this time frame is, do we continue to hold last year's prices in crude oil? And if we do continue to hold last year's prices in crude oil, then I would be up for a test of this area's balance high. We'll go to a smaller time frame chart in a second. But if we are able to get above this area, then I would look for tests on a larger time frame, multi-day, potential multi-week trade for a retest of last year's VPOC. And if we continue lower through the prior year's low, then we have targets below, which I'll get to. Let's go to a smaller time frame chart to discuss crude oil. Okay, before we go any further here, I would like to ask you to please like and subscribe if you are enjoying the video, or just maybe if you use crude oil for anything. Do you drive a car? Do you have a lawnmower? Anything like that, maybe just press like for crude oil, even if you're not into the charts. Maybe that'll help. Trying to get to 10,000. Anyway, let's move on. Here's crude oil. This is full session. Again, the lavender areas are overnight. If I put the stock zones on, which we have in crude, see this key resistance up here? This is actually kind of the bounds for getting up into the upper distribution. It corresponds roughly with the prior year's value low that I talked about, and this area up here, this purple, corresponds with last year's VPOC and the composite VPOC going back 3 years in crude. Now, if looking lower, if we continue lower in this area of trade that we have, there is another, let me get rid of this. We do have a CV or a MCV VPOC down here as well, which, where do we have it here? Right here from the 60-66 region, which we have pushed to test overnight. So basically what we're seeing in crude, we tried to push to the top of that range. We had this day here, this sort of island situation of trade that kicked us back out, kicked us lower, but we're still very roughly kind of holding this trend higher off the lows. So for me, what I'm looking at, what I'll be looking at, we have this LVN right here in the overnight profile. So for me, is if we are unable to get above this LVN, unable to try to recover yesterday's range, I think it's a pretty good odds that we take the overnight low. If we take the overnight low, the next target will be this gap zone left from 5.9. I am open to some support at this gap zone, but that support will only really mean anything if we get back above this LVN, which is my kind of LIS. If we're able to get back above this LVN, then I would be open to a potential push for the overnight high and gap close, but I would expect this area to still be resistance on the first test. If we are able to get into the VPOC of this area, yesterday's range, then I would be open to a push to take yesterday's high. But at this point right now, I'm really kind of expecting some excursion lower, a take of the overnight low. But for me, this overnight LVN will be the key over underline. If we hold below it, I'm looking for the overnight low. I'm looking for this gap zone. If we really continue, I'll be up for a test of these single prints left from 5.8. On the other hand, like I said, if we get above this LVN, then I'm open to a test of the overnight high stat. If we continue, I'm up for the gap closing. And if we can really get through yesterday's VPOC and move, then that could change the whole game. I'm not necessarily expecting that today. But that's what I'm seeing in crude so far. I think that the way crude auctions is very clear. If you're into auction market theory, I think it can be a really good trade. We'll talk about it a little bit more as if the S&Ps continue to kind of slow down, we'll be talking a lot more about crude oil. But I'm going to wrap it up here because we're at 15 minutes and we don't want to go too long. That's all I got for you today. I hope that this is useful for you. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, and I hope your wonderful morning continues. And most of all, I hope you find some way to improve your trading today that is not dependent upon your P&L, but is dependent upon your process. That's what I got. Time to get to the actual trading part of the day. That's what pays the bills. Let's do it, guys. Let's get out there and clock those ticks. Ciao.